Thank you for joining us for another installment of NAMI Cares podcast. Today we're going to talk about CIT. And I'm sure you're out there wondering, what does CIT mean? Well, luckily I have my friend and the president of NAMI Kane County North here, Lori Husky, and she's here to tell us a little bit about what CIT is and how it has been beneficial to the community.
Okay. Good morning. Thank
morning.
you. I want to clarify, I'm not a CIT trainer. I do participate in CIT trainings, and I'll get into a little of that a little bit later. But I'm happy to talk about this because I'm excited that our community here in Elgin has embraced this kind of training.
So what does CIT stand for?
It stands for Crisis Intervention Team. And the impetus for getting something like this started happened in 1985, I believe, down in Memphis, where two mothers experienced some really awful things when their children with mental illness were arrested and hauled off in police cars instead of taken to a hospital.
Ah, okay.
So they went and met with community leaders and said, we have to do better than this. And that was where it started. And I believe there's over 2,500 communities in the U.S. now that embrace CIT training.
So organizations like the police, the local police, who else then would implement CIT training?
Well, I'm going to speak about Elgin or Kane County here in Illinois. The Sheriff's Department, the local police departments, we have had other first responders like fire departments take the training. I've participated in trainings where there have been the first responders, meaning the people that do the dispatching, because they literally are the first voice we hear when we call for help. And they found it very, very helpful to be trained.
Can you walk me through what a typical CIT session would look like when you're teaching one of these organizations, the police, the firemen, et cetera? It's
a 40-hour training. So it has been difficult for some police departments, especially the small ones, to give up an officer or two, to be gone, and not have enough people to cover all the shifts. I will say that a couple of years ago here in Kane County, the Sheriff's Department filled in and covered shifts for police departments, the smaller police departments, so that their officers could be trained. They are trained in understanding the different mental illnesses, medications, side effects of medications, interactions of drugs and alcohol with medications. They hear family members, and I've spoken as a family member of what it's been like. None of us ever wants to accept the fact that our child that we've had to contact the police department about our own child, but it has happened. It helps them to see a family face in the struggle. We bring in consumers who've had arrests and share their experiences, and we share good and bad experiences too, so that they get a real grasp on how it affects the person who's ill as well as their family member.
So can you give me maybe an example, if you know of one, of a typical, a family member's in distress, you call the local police, how they would handle that interaction differently than...
Sure. I want to preface by saying when I joined NAMI Kane County North, we held a forum for law enforcement. And at that time, the Elgin Police Department did not have anybody that could come and participate. So I asked specific questions and said, how do you treat someone with a mental illness when you're called out during a crisis? And the response that came back to me in writing is like anyone else who breaks the law. So I've seen a big change in that. I'm going to share a little story of my own. In general, we had good responses from the police and fire department when our son was involved. In fact, I had a police officer come back to my house after a very difficult time, and my son was in the hospital, and he said, "I went to high school with your son. I just came back to check on you." And
Aww.
That was very meaningful. But we had an incident where our son had disappeared, and we filed a missing persons report. It was dead of winter, and I got a call saying, "This is the EPD. We found your boy." And so I went to the site where they found him. They had found him unconscious, laying in the snow. It was bitter cold. He had frostbite on his back. His wallet was soaked completely through. Everything in there was, so he had been laying there a long time. And they told me they were going to transport him to the hospital. And so I met them there. And when I got in, I was behind the police officer who was telling the receptionist, his mom says he has mental illness, but I think he's just an addict. And I stood there, and the police officer turned around and saw me, and there was absolutely no need for me to say a word. He realized his judgment, how hurtful that was,
Right.
how painful that was.
Because oftentimes addiction of some nature goes along
Our
with
son
mental
had a
illness.
dual diagnosis, yes. After that ended, we were at the hospital 7 hours before they transported him to a facility, and the policeman had to fill out some forms, and he said, "This must be really hard for you." And I said, "Do you have children?" And he said, "Yes, too." And I said, "I hope you never, ever live through something like this." And that was my real beginning of saying, this isn't right. It's not a justification if my son broke the law to do anything wrong, but to be treated like you're less than valuable to the human race is horrible, and especially as mom is standing there.
And that's part of breaking the stigma surrounding mental illness too.
Absolutely, it
that
is.
CIT helps to provide for our local law enforcement
Right.
and the community.
Right. Then I became involved with the Kane County Mental Health Coordinating Council. We meet in Geneva at the courthouse down there, and we are a group of about 50 people in law enforcement, in mental health services. DeKalb, Kendall, and Kane County, as well as NAMI here in Elgin, Kane County North, have had a big push to, our goal is to see that every law enforcement person is trained in CIT. Every first responder is trained. And I'm proud to say that we're realizing that dream.
That's awesome. So how many would you say? What percentage?
I don't know countywide. I can only speak to Elgin. And in February, our police chief, Lally, told me that they had 80% of their department trained in CIT.
That's fantastic.
And that everyone would be trained by the end of summer. So it becomes a partnership. It's important. We all know if we have someone with a mental illness, it's nice when they can partner in their recovery. And part of that is for us to be involved in our community for the safety of the police officers as well as our loved ones who are involved in crisis.
I've heard that there is an Illinois state mandated program out there to help law enforcement be aware of what they're going to be coming into.
Right.
So can you tell me about this program?
Yes, it's called Premise Alert, and it went into law in 2009. Every police department in the state of Illinois, sheriff's department included, has forms available, or go online and find a form that they can fill out that will alert all first responders to anything that they need to know if they're called in a crisis. Is that person deaf? Does that person have autism? Do they have a mental illness, physical disability? Are there medication problems? Those kind of things get filled out. And when you put a phone number on that form, anytime a call comes in from that phone number, that alert will come up so that our first responders aren't just walking into something without any kind of background knowledge. It's helpful for them.
So what specific services has Elgin Police Department added?
Well, besides just moving forward with the goal of having everyone trained in CIT, the Elgin Police Department, I believe it was last year, developed a special unit, mental health unit, where there is one designated officer who handles specific things concerning the mental health crises that may come up, generally goes to the scene. He's been trained to help de-escalate, and that's our goal, is treatment, not jail. And thankfully, the Elgin Police Department has that same goal. So having people trained in the CIT, as well as they invite social workers to ride along with them. NAMI has been invited to ride along perhaps a week after the event to meet with the family and say, is there anything you need? How are you doing? Because these crises are trauma for the family as well. So I'm really pleased that we have this special unit, and we'll see if there's a success here with this unit. I expect to see other law enforcement in the county embrace this idea.
So how can we, as they say, spread the news? How can we help to get involved, to help our local police forces become involved in CIT training?
You know, an interesting thing was when I first heard of the CIT training, we started telling family members at our support groups, if you need to call the police, ask for a CIT officer. And one family member came in and said, oh my gosh, I did that, and the dispatcher said, what's CIT? So I contacted our police chief at that time and said, we have to have better communication so that the information we're giving our family members is accurate, as well as for the safety of your officers too. And he really got behind this and started this whole movement of, listen, we have to get everybody trained so that when a family is terrified for whatever reason, calling for help, there might be somebody that can be there that's been trained to de-escalate the situation rather than encourage anything to escalate and get worse.
Well, I want to thank you, Lori, for being with us for another informative podcast for NAMI Cares. If you have any additional questions, where should our listeners go?
They should call us at our NAMI office, and that is 847-410-9719. Or they can go to our website, NAMI Kane County North. It's namikcn.org. And you could go to the NAMI site, the national site, nami.org, for more information on CIT.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.